it's time to kick ass and chew bubble gum. And I'm all out of gum.
What's up you guys, MrJohn here, and today we're going to review Burnout sequel, Burnout 2 Point of Impact, released for the PS2 in October 2002 and for the Xbox and GameCube in the following year, and it was published by Acclaim Entertainment. However, the later copies of the game were published by EA Games. The game was once again developed by Criterion Games. As for me, when I was a kid, I didn't have the chance to play this game until much later when I got my PC and played it using PCX2, and hot damn, this game is one hell of a good ride. But why Burnout 2 was a good game? Well, let's see if Criterion's second impact in the racing genre was actually superior than its previous impact. So without any further ado, let's find out in this review. The first thing you see in Burnout 2 is that the game has a tutorial, which is actually pretty nice since it helps newcomers learn how to master the game's mechanics like near misses, drifting, and boosting, not to mention that the tutorial is actually pretty short, but it's actually effective. Actually, if you get gold on all the sections of the tutorial mode, you get a new car, which is pretty damn pog. Then after that, you can choose the following modes: Championship mode, Single Race, Time Attack, Offensive Driving 1-on-1, which is the tutorial, and Crash, which is one of Burnout 2's new modes, which I'll get to that later. Then you can pick your favorite car and your track, and you're good to go. So, is the gameplay of Burnout 2 better than its predecessor? To no one's surprise, it's much better than Burnout 1 in every possible way. First off, let's talk about the controls. The controls in this game have received a major improvement. They are much responsive and tighter than its predecessor. I talk about the controls in Burnout 1, they were stiff and not as responsive as in Burnout 2. However, in this game, the controls receive a major overhaul, and a good overhaul at that. Controlling the cars was a pretty good thing to do in this game, as it was much easier to control them than in the previous game. It's not just the controls that got improved, however. The boost mechanic in this game was also overhauled and improved, and then some. The way to obtain boosts was much easier, which makes the game more accessible for both newcomers and veterans alike. In the previous game, getting near misses was much harder to obtain since you have to be like extremely close to the traffic, resulting you getting crashed more often than not. In the sequel, however, it's much easier to obtain boosts as well as doing near misses. Doing boost chains in this game is much more fun than in the previous game. In Burnout 1, even if you drove dangerously while boosting, there was a small chance that you could boost again, something that I forgot to talk about it in my previous review. But in this game, performing boost chains was actually easier and more rewardable, because you can now do air jumping, which was pretty awesome to see. And as I said before, obtaining boost chains was pretty fun since it was much easier to drive dangerously in this game, and you could do up to 19 boost chains in a race depending on what track you were without crashing once, and that gave lots of adrenaline and it was so damn good. The championship mode in this game has been improved and then some. This time around you have more to do, such as doing pursuits, face-offs, and racing point-to-point tracks, which gave the mode more flavor than its predecessor. The championship has 15 events, which is much longer than Burnout's 1 championship mode. But I know what you're all thinking, well that's nice at all, but if I beat the championship mode, am I done with the game?
No!
You do unlock a new mode called Custom Series Championship, which is the championship mode but harder and faster when it comes to the difficulty. And that's pretty damn good since it gives the game more longevity. There's also the Pursuit mode, which is actually pretty fun to play, and the mode itself actually inspired the next game in the franchise, Burnout 3 Takedown. And why, you may ask? Well, it's because this mode consists of you, the cop, versus the enemy, and you have to wreck the enemy before it escapes. And that was the closest thing to takedowns before they were introduced in the next game, Burnout 3. And I have to give Criterion credit for actually using this mode as a true inspiration for the next game. I mean, if that doesn't spell epic foreshadow, I don't know what does. Anyway, we also have a new mode that is iconic and staple element in the future Burnout entries, the Crash mode. The mode is pretty simple, cause as much damage as you can by slamming your car into the traffic. Simple as that. Every traffic vehicle affected by the initial crash contributes to the amount of damage caused during the crash. The more physical damage a trafficked vehicle takes, the higher the damage amount will contribute. Thus, the total number of vehicles destroyed will be used as a multiplier bonus. For me, while I do like the crash mode, it's not my cup of tea. Make no mistake, it's a fun mode, and it's actually a nice change of pace from doing races over and over. But I personally prefer doing races as it's much more fun to do than playing this mode. But at the end of the day, it's just my personal opinion, so take it with a pinch of salt. The car roster in Burnout 2 has received a nice bona fide upgrade. Not only their visuals have been improved, but now stat-wise they don't feel the same. The cars have different stats, making each car feel unique from one another. One criticism that I had with Burnout 1 is that the cars felt the same when it comes to their stats. But in this game, that consequence was gone. Also, the vehicle diversity has been improved. For instance, there's a NASCAR-like car, a 1930s car, a supercar, and even a JDM car. Talk about variety. As you complete the championship mode, you will unlock upgraded variants of some vehicles. These custom cars are much stronger than their unmodified counterparts. This makes Burnout 2's car roster pretty diverse, and for a sequel, that's a big win and then some. As I mentioned in the Burnout 1 review, the cars are based upon real-life cars. The same thing applies here in Burnout 2. For instance, the supercar is based upon the Celine S7, whereas the custom coupe is based upon the Acura RSX. However, with its green color and blue tier vinyl, it's actually based upon the Mitsubishi Eclipse GCX from the movie Fast and the Furious. You know, that car that Brian O'Connor used during the first minutes of the movie, and then unfortunately it got destroyed. I assume Criterion took the inspiration for that car in the movie, and thus the custom coupe was born. And speaking of the custom coupe, it's one of the most iconic cars in the franchise, as it appeared in almost every entry in the franchise: Burnout 3, Legends, Dominator, and Paradise. And as a result, it's one of the most memorable cars in the franchise. And I like the design of the car, as it's based on the Mitsubishi Eclipse GCX from the Fast and the Furious, and in that regard it gets an A+ in my book. The track roster also got an improvement as well. The game has 15 tracks, 30 if you count the reverse version of them, and the roster is much more diverse, with beach-themed tracks, snowy tracks, desert-themed tracks, and there's even an airport track of all things. The game also has point-to-point tracks, which encompass portions of two different tracks with a different route to connect the two tracks together, which was pretty damn cool to see at the time. It's worth mentioning that you can also change the condition of any track, which was pretty cool for the time. For instance, you can race in the interstate loop at dawn or during rain time, which is pretty damn cool to see at the time when the game was released, giving the tracks more flavor than usual. The difficulty in Burnout 2 is much more easier than its predecessor. The traffic is much less dense, giving the player more freedom to boost chaining, not to mention the punishment for being crashed many times is much less severe since the AI doesn't have that dreadful rubber band effect that the previous game had, making it more accessible for both newbies and veterans alike. The championship mode is not that hard, but the custom championship mode is much more intense, forcing the player using much stronger cars, which is pretty understandable. On May 2003, the game was also released for the Xbox under the name Burnout 2 Developer's Cut. This version contained new additional car skins as well as more crash events. As a result, the Xbox is considered as the definitive version. Unfortunately, I don't have this version, nor I do have an Xbox, but I do have the PS2 version, so at least there's that. Overall, the gameplay of Burnout 2 is damn good and then some. It had tons of great quality of life improvements, most notably the controls, the car roster, more variety in terms of modes. Its gameplay is so damn good that it makes Burnout 1's gameplay look like dog shit, a racy game for toddlers and babies, and that's really saying something. Graphics wise, Burnout 2 looks slick and fast for a PS2 game. Just like with Burnout 1, the game runs at 60 frames per second, which is always important for any racing game, regardless if it's an arcade or a simulation racing game. The car design looks much better than in Burnout 1. You could tell the difference between them. There is much more detail in the cars in Burnout 2 than in Burnout 1, and it's not just the car design, the track's graphics looks much more vibrant and colorful. Not to say that the graphics in Burnout 1's tracks aren't bad, but you can tell that Criterion listened to his fans and it shows, and in that regard, they nailed it. Oh, also Burnout 2 is the first Burnout game that supports 480p or progressive scan mode, which back in 2002, it was damn good to see a game running at a high resolution on a console, so good job Criterion. However, if you think that 480p isn't enough for you emulation specialists such as myself, No worries though, with PCX2 you can play this game at even higher resolutions than 480p, which for me is a fucking blessing, and it just goes to show how emulation is better than playing on a real console. At the end of the day, the graphics have been improved in Burnout 2 and it clearly shows. Well done, Criterion, well done. The soundtrack. So, is the soundtrack of Burnout 2 any good? Good God, yes. The game's soundtrack is one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard in my life. The game has a lot of upbeat and adrenaline music to throw you around and they are awesome to hear. Here, have some of this. The soundtrack was once again composed by Stephen Root, and you can tell that compared to Burnout 1's soundtrack, the soundtrack in this game has a more distinct style, as it includes much heavier uses of an electric guitar, which is actually pretty nice to hear. Also, whenever you use boost during a race, the music actually gets louder, which is a pretty nice touch. The engine sounds also are pretty top notch for an arcade racer, as well as the sounds when you crash into vehicles are pretty loud and satisfying to hear. In conclusion, to no one's surprise, Burnout 2 is an awesome racing game. No, scratch that. It's one of the best PS2 games I've ever played, alongside other games like GT4, Burnout Revenge, and the Ratchet & Clank trilogy. It's a sequel that totally made Burnout 1 look like dog shit in every possible way. Everything that could have been improved was improved. Progression, gameplay, graphics, music, everything has been overhauled for the better. That's why I said if you wanted to start with the Burnout franchise, start with this one. It's much more chaotic and more enjoyable than the first one. If you want to buy the game, you can get this game on Amazon for between 3 to 13 bucks used. However, if you have an Xbox, then get the developer's cut, which is the definitive version of this game as it has more content than in the PS2 and GameCube versions. You can buy this version on eBay for about 13 bucks, that version is worth for that price. Overall, Burnout 2 is one hell of a good time and then some. But one question still remains. Will Criterion ever score a hat-trick with their franchise? Who knows? Maybe we'll figure it out in the near future. Thanks for watching everyone. If you enjoyed my review, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe for more content. And I'll see your demonic and gorgeous faces next time.